Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just getting our LinkedIn Live set up and we'll get started in just a minute. One second. Thanks, everyone, for your patience as we get the live stream set up. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We will be discussing the Understanding President Trump's H-1B visa proclamation and potential talent mobility impacts. Please just give us a minute while we get the LinkedIn live stream going, and then we will get started. Hi, everyone. Just give us 1 minute to get the LinkedIn live stream going, and then we'll get started with this important conversation. All right, we're just getting the live stream up and going. But while we're waiting for that, thank you everyone for joining us today. And you'll hear this spiel one more time while we get our LinkedIn Live group coming, and then we will all get started together. All right, we are now live on LinkedIn and we're here on our Zoom WERC webinar. So I'm going to do a quick introduction and then we're going to get started. Today, we are here to discuss the President Trump's H-1B visa proclamation and the potential talent mobility impacts. Thank you for joining us today. This is a WERC webinar and I'm going to pass it off to Mike Jackson to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for joining today. The as many of you know, the last several days have really been a whirlwind for talent mobility, navigating a myriad of changes that have impacted talent mobility related to the H-1B visa, starting with announcements Friday afternoon, coming from Washington, including the signing of a proclamation by President Trump. And so it's been a dizzying and oftentimes rapidly changing landscape the last several days, and really excited to bring two of our industry's top experts on for a conversation over the next few minutes to talk about what's occurred over the last several days, what are the areas that we don't know, and what all this might mean for talent mobility and how talent mobility should be thinking through and preparing for the road ahead. And so really excited to have with me today, and forgive me, I'm Mike Jackson, the Vice President of Public Policy and Research here at Work, and really excited to be joined today with Kelli Duehning from BAL, who is the chair of Work's Immigration Policy Forum, as well as Daniel Pierce from Fragaman. And so really appreciate your time today, and thank you everyone for joining. And so, Kelli, would love to start with you, and would love to really just take a couple of minutes and walk through sort of what occurred, starting with the events that on Friday, when with the president's proclamation and the actions that have occurred since then. So, help us understand sort of what's occurred over the last several days.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and really happy to be here. And hi, everybody. So yes, so as of Friday, mid-afternoon, everybody's aware that President Trump held a press conference where he announced this new executive order, which took all of us by surprise. And thus then later issued the language of what that executive order and proclamation stated. Even at that front end, there was some differences in what was said during the press conference and then what we actually read in the proclamation. So the text of the proclamation when it came out on Friday afternoon was crystal clear. If a foreign national outside of the United States on or after September 21st of 2025, the idea was they would not be able to enter the United States in H-1B status unless, right? So to me, that is a restriction on their travel. For anybody who was to travel, on or after September 21st, basically 12:01 a.m., right? Eastern Standard Time. So the only exceptions were the employer or the foreign national pay $100,000 fee, or the Secretary of Homeland Security determines that it is in the national interest to waive the travel restriction for either an individual beneficiary or for all beneficiaries working for a company or all H-1B workers in an industry. So those were the only carve outs. So it was either $100,000 fee or the national interest waiver. There were no other carve outs from the travel restrictions in the proclamation. The proclamation also made no mention of paying the $100,000 other than as some sort of mechanism to gain an exemption for the travel restrictions, right? So it's very clear in terms of what the proclamation stated. So, based upon all of that, as many of you know, we started reaching out and people started scrambling to let their folks know, hey, if you are outside of the United States and you're on an H-1B visa, please make sure you travel back to the United States immediately. During this whole time, while all of you were trying to get those foreign nationals in H-1B status back, there was also movement to try to get more clarification from the administration on all of this. So that was Friday night. So then, Mike, Saturday morning, and from what my understanding is fairly early Saturday morning, although I'm on West Coast time. So for some folks on the East Coast time, it might have been late morning, early afternoon. But in the morning, under pressure, the White House then decided to step back a bit from the language in this proclamation. And essentially, they came out with some bullet points that essentially said that this is a one-time fee that applies only to the petition. So there was questions of how often do you have to pay this? Who, where does it get paid? And some of those questions are still open, and I'll let Daniel speak more to that. But they clarified that this is a one-time fee that applies only to the petition. Then secondly, the second bullet was this proclamation only applies prospectively to petitions that have not yet been filed. And then they specifically stated the 2026 lottery and not renewals. Okay. Then the next bullet was does not impact the ability of any current visa holder to travel to or from the United States. And again, a little bit more clarity, but still not quite clear. We now know that at least current visa holders were going to be fine with traveling and they would not be subject to this proclamation. So that let a little bit of pressure off in terms of, us then being able to go back out and let our foreign nationals know that we're already outside of the United States, or even those here who had traveled this week, whether or not they were going to have any issue with traveling and coming back to the United States and not be subject to that $100,000 fee. So that's then Saturday mid-morning, mid-afternoon. Then shortly thereafter, I'd say about an hour or two later, then we got clarification from the various government agencies. I don't know that I would call it clarification. I think it left more questions. But nonetheless, we had USCIS, CBP, and then ultimately the Department of State and the White House. So not just the bullets, but then the White House also came out with some additional guidance that intended to soften the proclamation's impact. That's my take on it, is they heard the craziness, they heard the calls, and they were like, okay, let's soften this, let's pull back a little bit. So they attempted to clarify who was not subject to the proclamation. So it basically, the guidance when reading through the 3 different ones, really pretty much came out and said that any petitions filed prior to 12:01 Eastern Standard Time on September 21st of 2025 would not be subject to the proclamation. Any beneficiary who has a currently approved petition would also not be subject to the proclamation. And then any foreign national in possession of a validly issued H-1B non-immigrant visa would also not be subject to the proclamation. And again, this is travel restriction, right? Some clarification still is needed because we don't know a lot of the language that was used is they kept referring to petitions and not people. But nonetheless, here we are. Therefore, I think today and as of Sunday, we were very confident in saying that employees currently outside the US should plan to return and they should not have any issue. And we have been seeing that. We also have been encouraging folks who have appointments at the US consulates this week to go ahead, attend those appointments for your H-1B visa, and then travel back to the United States. Again, we're hearing reports that people have been doing that the last 2 days without any issue, and they've been able to travel back to the United States. Now, the question is, employees currently in the United States on an H-1B visa, but they want to travel over the next week or 2 or month or so. The question is, can they travel? And again, and Daniel, correct me if you're advising, we're indicating that you should be fine. However, as you're going to hear, this is changing very rapidly, especially because if you just listen to the proclamation restrictions, it was very clear these folks would not be let in without the $100,000 fee. But as the administration rolled it back, they are now saying, no, you're not subject to it. But again, they could change it at any moment, as well as the proclamation was published yesterday and the language did not change. So we are basically saying you should be able to travel, but travel with caution, or at least have a consultation before you travel to ensure you have the latest and greatest information. So that's where we're at. I think, to me, that's where the clarity is. After that, there is no other clarity.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, Kelly. And I think, going through in the last several days, a lot of, trying to decipher, and I've got my marked up copies of the proclamation and the memorandums, basically trying to, connect the various pieces within. And so really very much a moving threshold and trying to to see sort of how things shifted within. And so as you mentioned, we've gotten some clarifications within, but then lots of but there's still a whole host of open questions, or things that we've got some information on but that we need more within. And so Daniel, would love to turn it over to you and just see sort of what are some of those question marks that are still out there that could impact, talent mobility, and what should folks keep an eye on as we're continuing to see how this puzzle pieces together, as in terms of the, how all this fits together.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and it's great to be with you guys here today. I certainly agree with Kelly that there are more unknowns at this point than knowns. Some of the ways that these different pieces of information we've gotten from the government fit together really leave some gaps in our understanding about who's covered and what's covered. So, for example, one of them I see in the chat, someone was asking, will a change of employer petition count as a new H-1B and trigger the fee? That's one of the main questions I think on everyone's mind is, what is a new petition? What is a petition after the date of the proclamation? If I need to amend it or change something, some of the guidance says that extensions are not going to be covered. So same employer, just extending your time is not covered by the proclamation. But these other things, these other reasons why you might need to file an H-1B petition, we just don't know. Is that covered or is it not? One other major issue is cap exempt employers. So, if you're a university or a research organization, do you suddenly have to pay this $100,000 fee? The way that this much of the guidance and the proclamation are set up is to talk about the lottery as if everyone is cap subject. But we all know that there are plenty of employers who don't have that and who don't have to go through the lottery and who don't have other fees that apply in H-1B world. As of right now, my best reading is that the cap exempt employers are included, but that's really less than clear, I think, from what we have. The other issues that I think are unclear, to Kelly's point, there's no current way to pay this fee if you are inclined to do so. We don't have any idea about who is going to receive the payment, how you would actually do it, and when they're going to start collecting it. I think petitions being filed in the next few weeks, you're probably going to have a bit of a wait and see about am I going to be RFE'd for this fee? Do I, are instructions going to come out as to how I pay it if I'm inclined to pay it? Obviously, $100,000, I think, for most H-1B employers is sort of an outrageous fee to have to come up with for the average person. The second issue, as Kelly was alluding to, there's the way around the fee is to seek a waiver or an exception based on national interest. And we don't have any clarification from the government about how one can do that. So if you don't want to have to pay that $100,000 fee, but need to make an argument that hiring this person or that your organization or that your field should be exempted, presumably we're going to see more information coming out from the government about the factors they're going to consider and how they're going to think about this. But I think it's worth employers sitting down and thinking, what kinds of arguments would we make about this person or about our organization or even an entire field? One of the things that was floated in the press is, well, maybe we'll exempt doctors from this, right? So it may be profession specific or something like that. And what that may ultimately drive is a very patchwork system where you have certain employers who are subject to it and others who are not, or certain fields. A lot to be determined on that. And then finally, to my mind, the last big wild card, and of all of these, is litigation. We all know litigation is going to be brewing over whether this proclamation is lawful. I think it's sort of difficult to say which one wins between the various specific authorities concerning H-1Bs and what you have to show and what you have to pay and these other things versus the president's very broad authority under 212F to keep out any class of alien, I think is how it's phrased in the INA. It's very, very broad. I think the Supreme Court said in Trump v. Hawaii it exudes deference to the president. So does the deference go this far? I don't know, and I don't think anyone will know for some period of time. So I think it's not only do we not understand the very basic logistics of all of this about how to either pay the fee or not pay the fee, but we also don't understand whether this is going to go into full effect. So a lot of unknowns. And unfortunately, I know that I'm sure Kelly has had the same experience dealing with people who are terrified, right? Who are, do I need to run home? Do I need to take any action? Is this going to affect my upcoming renewal or extension or whatever I need to do? And we just don't know. Like, we're not keeping information from you. We're just sort of trying to parse through it as best we can, I think, all in real time.
Yeah, and another question that came up, just to follow up, Daniel, from what you were saying, is I think one of the questions in the chat is, will this be expanded to other visa types? And we don't know. I mean, it's very possible, depending upon what this administration's view is on those particular visas and whether they're having an impact on the US workforce, right? I think one specific thing is that I've seen is, do H-4s apply? And at this point, The H-4 is not listed in the proclamation nor in the guidance, so they shouldn't be subject to the $100,000 fee. But on the same, if their H-1B principal gets stuck outside of the United States and those H-4 dependents are inside the United States, do they continue to maintain their H-4 status? I mean, there's a lot of risk assessments that would need to be, kind of discussed, as well as the H-1B1 visa, I think is also another question I've seen come up. And again, it's not in the proclamation, so we don't think that it applies. But again, continued unknowns. And these are all things that, we're going to be continuing through trade associations, through WERC. We are asking the administration to provide clarity to a lot of these unknowns.
No, and that's a great point. And just to add on, I think on the question of other visa categories, the other piece of this is seeing what occurs with the litigation that Daniel you mentioned within, and where things land in terms of the 212F authority within, to see if this could potentially be a pathway for other that could be used in other categories. But even without that, we are seeing, through the normal regulatory process, a number of regulations coming through that, are either already announced, impacting, various elements impacting non-immigrant visas, duration of status for international student exchange visitors, for example, but then also, others that are included in the regulatory agenda that the administration just published, I think last week, that could have impacts as things continue to move forward in the coming months. Daniel, one question for you in terms of, and partly with the proclamation on Friday, one of the other announcement, H-1B related announcements that got a bit overshadowed in the process there was related to the Department of Labor's announcement of a new worksite compliance and enforcement initiative that they are launching, Project Firewall. And would love to get your and help folks make understand sort of what did the Department of Labor announce, sort of what is the potential ramifications of this Project Firewall.
Yeah, of course. And so, yes, the Department of Labor also made its own major H-1B related announcement, which is that it is going to be focusing a lot more on H-1B compliance. Now, the authorities underlying all of this, exist at the moment, and maybe some of you have faced a wage and hour investigation from the Department of Labor already. But the investigatory authorities, it's clear, are coming to the forefront and becoming a much more important piece of the puzzle for the administration. One of the things that ties this back to the proclamation is the proclamation complains of misuse of the H-1B visa, people being forced to train their replacements, companies laying off American workers and then hiring H-1Bs. And so I think another piece of that same through line is using the Department of Labor's existing authorities to go after employers that the administration feels are misusing the H-1B. So what this means in practice, I think, is that we're going to see a lot more investigations from the Department of Labor side. We're going to see, typically these sorts of investigations I was just talking about are initiated when a person goes to Department of Labor and complains. Now the Department of Labor Secretary herself is going to be able to initiate these sorts of investigations sua sponte and say, I think this employer needs to be investigated or needs to be looked at. And so what it really means is I think that employers need to get their houses in order, right? You need to do an audit to make sure that your LCAs, your public access files, are in order, that you're paying people the amounts that you're supposed to be paying them, et cetera. While these investigations may have been rare or rarer in the past, they're certainly going to come to the forefront now with this announcement. And I think another issue is going to be whether an investigation that starts as something from the Department of Labor sort of bleeds its way into the other parts of the immigration system. One thing that you start thinking about when the Department of Labor Secretary is involved is like, is she going to be talking to her counterparts at DHS and other agencies to really, identify bad actors in the system and go at them from all these different angles? And so as an employer, I think you want to get out ahead of this, realize that the landscape has changed. There's now more risk of these kinds of enforcement activities, and that you should do everything you can to ensure that if the government comes calling, you've got a plan in place for dealing with it, and that your underlying filings are substantively without problems.
And I think that last point is, critically important, both within this context, but then also, in light of what we've seen in other, worksite compliance activities with the administration in recent weeks and months, and really underscoring that this is a priority across visa categories and something that the administration is very much focused on, and looking at the at the adherence with US law, but then also the impacts on American workers. And so having that plan and thinking through, working with your councils, your immigration council, your employment council, your HR teams, your internal corporate councils, and just making sure that thinking through, seeing sort of all these various elements, I think is a critical piece. And I think, Danielle, a critical takeaway for those that may be watching to think through in terms of, how they can take something back within their organizations.
And I think one other thing to highlight on the compliance front, I agree with everything that Danielle said. I think one other thing that was interesting in the proclamation that was brought up was also a call to the Department of State and CBP to be on high alert for anyone who uses the B visa to get around. So like this whole B in lieu of H-1B, or they come as a B and then months later they file for an H-1B, right? So again, being on the lookout. So I think that was highlighted, certainly with, and I know we're not naming client names, but with manufacturing worksite enforcements that we recently saw in the news, and the use of some of their workers on the B visas, and the questions of whether or not they were properly using that, or how that affects certainly US workers. So I think any companies and any of you on the call who may be utilizing the B visa, I think to Daniel's point, is looking at that program, making sure you're utilizing that program under the reasons that State Department allows for those business visitors to come, and making sure that the travelers on those visas understand what the restrictions are when they are here in the US as well. Because I think we're going to start seeing more questions at the border, and certainly more review of the B visa as well, especially since they did highlight it in the proclamation.
Yep.
No, absolutely. And one of the other things, and again, as we talk about sort of the shifting sand here, with the regulatory action, one of the things that we saw just today was the publishing in the Federal Register of a proposed rule, that with a 30-day comment period, looking to revise the H-1B registration process and that lottery process. Kelli, would love to, maybe what's just a high level of what's in that rule that as we look to see sort of how this fits into the overarching picture that we're looking at related to H-1Bs.
Yeah, it was just published today, so we're certainly all still digging in, right? But I think high level a change is they're prioritizing wage, and they believe that wage, the higher you get paid, the more skilled you are. So they're making that sort of that leap, which we know doesn't necessarily in every industry equate, like higher pay doesn't necessarily mean it's the most skilled. But nonetheless, that is what they're looking at. So they want to change the lottery and give those that are in the higher wage level, like wage level 4, more chances in the lottery. So real quickly, from what we understand, if you are a wage level 4, you would get 4 chances to have your name run through the lottery. If you're wage level 3, you'll get 3 chances. If you're wage level 2, you'll get 2. And if you're wage level 1, you'll only have 1 chance. And then they're weighted, meaning when they run the level 1 lottery, there's only going to be a certain percentage of people that get selected. So if you're level 1, I think they estimated you'd have about a 15% chance of your name getting selected into the lottery. And then it goes up from there. I think it's like it goes to 30% for wage level 2, 40% for wage level 3, and then 60% for wage level 4. But they are not getting rid of the bachelor's and master's lottery. So somehow they're going to be adding that into the lottery selection as well. So again, that's really high level. So again, as you start looking at your, talent pool and who you are thinking or recruiting to be put in the H-1B lottery, this upcoming lottery, you're certainly going to need to be looking at, what job positions you are considering for the H-1B lottery, and then of course weighing those risks of the possibility of them actually getting selected.
That's great. Thanks, Kelly. Daniel, one question in the chat came through in the chat was, how the $100,000 fee in the proclamation may impact changes of status. And so would love to, throw that to you and see what, what your thoughts are on that, given what we know or don't know.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that is one of those instances where we're just not sure yet, right? It is a new petition. It is a petition that will be filed after the, current proclamation goes into effect, which went into effect on Sunday. So if you were to file a petition today and a change of status, I think it would be new and covered, but you were already here, all right? And this is the tension that Kelly was highlighting before between the way that it talks in terms of your entry and your travel, which is what 212F says, the underlying authority, and how the proclamation is phrased, but then the switch over to petitions and making new entries or getting new visas tied to those petitions. And so we're just awaiting further word from the government on how an instance like a change of status is going to be covered or not by the proclamation.
Great, thanks, Daniel. We're close to the half-hour mark, and so want to be mindful of everyone's time. I do want to ask one last question of both of you, and this comes from one that was raised by attendees, and I think mirrors the I think the most frequent question that I've heard in the last several days, and and this is how can talent mobility professionals not only stay informed of changes as they occur, but also how can they start how can they start working to help their organizations both understand, but then to the extent that they can prepare for these changes. And so would love to for each of you, and Daniel, I'll start with you, sort of what's how can folks stay up to speed on what's going to continue to be a very evolving topic, and any takeaways that you've seen or heard that how folks can start supporting their organizations.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this is fast changing. I mean, I think that we as a law firm issued several alerts over the weekend, right, on, the evolving situation and how we view it. I think it really is an instance where you just have to keep your ear to the ground. I know that our firm and others put out alerts. I know that we're constantly monitoring the news feeds, right? Because as Kelly was pointing out, no one anticipated this, late day press conference on a Friday that was going to upend everyone's weekends. And they're keeping a lot of immigration close to the vest, I think, strategically. So you have to just monitor the news like everyone else and monitor, trusted practitioners who are putting out the best guidance that they can. I think as an organization at this point, I would start thinking in terms of what does next year's lottery look like if we have a version of the rule that was just proposed this morning, so altering the sort of selection formula and who gets more entries, et cetera. And I have to pay $100,000 for H-1B. Now, I don't know that that's going to be the state come next year's lottery. We're 6 months out. But if that were the state of play, how would that affect my organization? And work your way back from there, right? Like maybe the fee goes away or is lowered or whatever to a more tolerable level. But if that's the state of play, how does my organization need to shift? Because I think you have, I'm a planner by nature. I think many people are, and I like being able to plan toward, sort of what is happening 6 months from now. Maybe that means you don't rely on H-1Bs as much. Maybe it means you park people overseas. Maybe it means you use a different visa type. et cetera. But I think you need to start thinking through that now, because that is at least a potential way that this goes 6 months from now, is a very dramatically changed landscape for the H-1B.
Yeah, and I know we're short on time. I agree with everything that Daniel said. I think, leaning in with your immigration provider, if you don't have an immigration provider because your program is too small, certainly as the, chair of the Global Immigration Forum workplace here with WERC, we're definitely as a group going to be continuing to push out notifications. So, but find that trusted source, not only your immigration provider, but find that trusted source, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a trade association, whether it's another law firm, whatever, lean in on that and make sure you've got something where you're going to get that information quickly and it's accurate. I think that's the most important thing. If anything that we learned this weekend, it was the accuracy.
Yeah.
So quick and accurate. And then I agree. I think, my recommendation is broad brush right now because of all the unknowns. So it's unfortunate because it's going to be putting you all into a position where you're going to have to be doing a lot of work over the next couple of weeks with your cap planning. And as Daniel was saying, like, start off big, assume that everything, assume that those fees are going to be there, and then work your way back. And then, that way you'll have that full picture to brief to your leadership, and can really have those discussions of, is this program going to work for us, understanding the changes that are about to happen in front of us. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think, to that point, a couple of last things I would highlight. I think one, and, for work members, we published on the website early this week a member resource on what we know, questions that are still answered, providing more context and links to the various memorandums to Proclamation and other resources as they keep coming out, and we'll be updating as this ground continues to evolve. But also, in the coming weeks, we'll be working on, comments to USCIS on the H-1B registration rule that will be coming out, and we will need to hear from you on, what the proposed changes to the registration may mean and how we can, put forward, feedback to the agency through the public comment period, which will be absolutely critical. And then the third piece is, as you're seeing or hearing impacts, make sure that you're connected and sharing this feedback, both with your trusted partners, your immigration councils, your RMCs, other service providers, but also, share that back with us at work and with other associations so that we know and are seeing or hearing what impacts that you all and your people are experiencing, particularly as talent mobility is at the front lines of navigating these changes. And so what you see and hear is critically important. And so to quote the phrase from the subway courses, if you see something, say something, because it's a rapidly evolving situation. And the last point, Kelli mentioned the immigration policy forum. Membership is open throughout the year for the immigration policy forum. We are also having a special meeting of the forum this Friday that, if there are corporate practitioners that are interested in joining in and talking through the items that we've discussed today, reach out to me directly via email, mjackson@talenteverywhere.org, and we can get folks connected in as space permits. But get connected into your outlets of information, your regional groups, and elsewhere. This is going to be continue to evolve, and then those connections are critically important. And staying on top of information and leveraging experts, such as as Kelli and Daniel, and to stay on top of what's going on. And so, Kelli, Daniel, really appreciate your time today. Thank you for helping us walk through what we know and don't know. And and everyone, both in the webinar and on LinkedIn Live, really appreciate you joining today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our speakers today. We're just going to give it a minute on LinkedIn Live to close the webinar, but it has ended. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Kelly.